So, what if I told you that logic isn't what you think it is? That it has just as much to do with your gut and your heart as it does with your head? In this explainer, we're going to tear down the old definition of logic and build a new one. And honestly, it might just change the way you think and the way you feel.
You know, when you hear the word logic, you probably picture someone like Mr. Spock from Star Trek, right? All brain, no emotion, just pure objective calculation. But what if that's only like half the story? What if logic is something way more fundamental and way more, well, human?
Okay, let's just forget all the complex formulas and the cold calculations for a second. The real heart of logic is so much simpler. It is just the awareness that one thing leads to another. Seeing that link, that connection between a cause and its effect. That's it. Seriously. And once you get that simple idea, you're going to start seeing logic absolutely everywhere.
So, if logic is really all about tracing that line from a cause to its effect, it turns out our brains have two very, very different ways of doing it. Let's break down these two fundamental paths of reasoning. This is where it gets really interesting. We're always told to separate thinking from feeling, right? Like they're these opposing forces, but in reality, they can actually be two sides of the same logical coin. We reason with our thoughts, for sure, but we also reason with our feelings. And because both are valid ways of connecting cause and effect, they are both legitimate forms of logic.
So how do these two paths actually work? Well, on one hand, you've got feeling-based reasoning. That's all about connecting one feeling to another, right here in the moment. Then on the other hand, you have thought-based reasoning, which is about carefully tracing logical consequences out into the future. The crucial difference, the real game changer here, is that one word, prediction. One path operates in the now, while the other is always looking ahead.
All right, let's make this feel a little less abstract and a lot more concrete. We're going to use a simple, universal example, the experience of getting hit. This is going to show us exactly how these two types of logic play out in the real world, in just a fraction of a second. Okay, imagine someone hits you. Bam! The feeling-based path is instantaneous. Cause, the hit. Effect, the feeling of pain, which immediately causes you to react. Maybe you yell, maybe you flinch away. See, there's a clear, logical link there, but you are not thinking about what happens next. You are living entirely in the logic of the now.
Now let's hit rewind on that exact same moment. You get hit, but this time, for just a split second, you pause. The thought-based path kicks in. You still feel the pain, of course, but your mind starts tracing cause and effect forward in time. You start asking, okay, if I hit back, what happens then? What are the future risks here? This isn't a logic of reaction, it's a logic of prediction and consequence.
So we have this lightning-fast, feeling-based path, and this slower, more deliberate, thought-based path. Now it's really tempting to ask, well, which one is better? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is, which one is right for the situation you're in?
You know, each path has its own distinct power and its own unique peril. That feeling-based logic, it is incredibly fast. It's perfect for those tactical, in-the-moment decisions. Think a sports reflex or slamming on the brakes. But its great danger is that it can be super reckless. Thought-based logic, on the other hand, is brilliant for strategy, for minimizing future risk. But man, it can be way too slow when you need to act now.
And this really forces us to ask a crucial question about our own instincts, doesn't it? Is your gut reaction a sharp reflex that's been born from years of experience, or is it just a reckless impulse? The difference there, and the reliability of your feeling-based logic, it really comes down to the quality of your past experiences.
Okay, so we've seen how logic works, but what happens when it just breaks down? What happens when we face something that feels, well, impossible? We use that word impossible all the time, but honestly, most of the time we're misusing it. When we say a problem is impossible, what we really mean is that we haven't found a creative solution yet. It's just a temporary label for a block in our own thinking.
Just think about the journey of any great invention or idea. First, we hit a wall. We confidently say, nope, can't be done, impossible. Then, maybe days or even centuries later, someone finds a way through. And notice how the story changes. We don't say the impossible became possible, we say we figured it out. The impossibility was never a fact of the universe, it was just a temporary lack of vision.
So, is anything truly impossible? Like for real, never gonna happen impossible? Yes, absolutely. But true impossibility has nothing to do with human creativity or our temporary blocks. It's about something that breaks the absolute fundamental rule of logic itself, that connection between cause and effect.
So what is the one unbreakable law of reality? It is breathtakingly simple. An effect cannot come before its cause. You can't feel the pain of the hit before the punch lands. This isn't a creative block we need to solve. It is a fundamental law of the universe. This is true impossibility.
So, you've got these two incredible tools in your reasoning toolkit: the fast, feeling-based logic for the here and now, and the deliberate, thought-based logic for what's to come. The real question then is, in your life, in your biggest decisions, which path guides you? And maybe more importantly, when should you learn to switch?
All right, welcome back. So, last time we really dug into what logic is all about, right? Today, we're going to build on that. We're going deeper into the architecture of how we think. We'll be talking about intuition, how we grasp these huge universal truths, and what happens when our thinking just hits a wall. So, here's the game plan. First, a real quick refresher on logic. Then, we're diving into this idea of a universe in your mind. After that, we'll tackle what happens when thinking goes wrong, and then we'll tie it all together: truth, those mental blocks, and our intuition. Okay, so first things first, let's make sure we're all on the same page here and just quickly touch on that core idea from our last chat. Remember that big question we asked? If you strip everything else away, what is logic, really, at its absolute core? And what we landed on was pretty simple, right? It's just being aware of cause and effect. That's it. Whether it's a cold, hard thought process or more of a gut feeling, if you're tracing that line from A to B, you're using logic. It's literally the foundation for how we make sense of the world. But here's where it gets really interesting. What are the limits of that? I mean, think about it. Our own personal experience with cause and effect is actually pretty tiny. So how do we jump from our little corner of the world to these massive, universal conclusions? And that question leads us right here, to this really incredible, almost magical ability of our minds to find enormous truths from just the tiniest clues. I mean, really think about this for a second. Your senses, what you see, what you hear, they're limited to right here, right now. You can't explore the whole universe, right? So how on earth can we say something is a universal truth, true everywhere, for all time? How does our little slice of the pie tell us what the whole thing tastes like? Well, the answer might lie in this idea called fitra. You can think of it as a kind of innate intuition. It's like we're all born with this internal blueprint of reality already installed in our minds. So our mind isn't a blank slate. It's got a pre-existing framework that's just waiting to connect the dots that our senses feed it. Okay, here's a fantastic way to picture this. The CCTV analogy. Imagine a security camera only catches a quick flash of a wheel, a piece of a handlebar. Your brain doesn't just see fragments, does it? Nope. It instantly goes, ah, I know what that is. It pulls up its internal blueprint for bicycle and completes the picture for you. You just know it's a bike, even though you only saw a tiny piece of it. And that is the crucial point here. We're not just passively taking in information, we are actively mapping what we see onto this built-in framework. It's how a tiny piece of proof can make us feel the logic of a massive universal truth. Okay, so this system is incredibly powerful, but it's not foolproof. What happens when it seems to crash? What's going on when we hit a wall and run smack into a contradiction? And that brings up a really big puzzle. If the universe itself is just this perfect, unbreakable chain of cause and effect, then where in the world do contradictions come from? I mean, we see them all the time, in arguments and our own thoughts. What's up with that? The key, and this is a big one, is understanding a crucial difference. Contradictions don't exist out there, in the real world. Reality just is. It's a constant, unbreakable flow. Contradictions happen in here, inside our minds. They're a glitch in our thinking, not a glitch in the universe. Yeah, this quote absolutely nails it. A contradiction is a cognitive thing. It has to do with how we think. It's not an ontological thing, which has to do with reality itself. You can think of it like a bug in our mental software, not a flaw in the actual world. You know, the computer analogy is just perfect for this. When your laptop freezes up while you're working on a document, you don't get mad at the document, right? Of course not. You know the problem is with the computer's program. A contradiction is the exact same thing. It's our brain's processor just hanging. It's a mental blue screen of death, telling us, hey, your current way of thinking can't handle this in. Okay, so let's pull all of this together now. We've got logic, we've got intuition, and now we have this idea of mental blocks. So what does our complete mental toolkit look like? So here's the breakdown. You've got logic. That's your tool for tracing the roads of cause and effect. Then you have intuition, or fitra. That's like your internal Google Maps, the satellite view that shows you the whole landscape. And finally, a contradiction? That's not a feature of the landscape. It's just a road closed sign popping up on your personal map. It's a dead end in your thinking. And this is where it all connects back to our last conversation, bringing us full circle. Remember how we talked about things we call impossible and how they're often just a creative block, what we called a Ubuntu? Well, a contradiction is the exact same idea. It's not a real wall out there in the world. It's just a wall we've hit in our own minds. So let's end with this really powerful thought. If a contradiction, if impossible, isn't actually a feature of reality, but just a block in your own mind, then what could you solve just by finding a new way to think about it? What impossible problem in your life right now is just waiting for you to redraw your own mental map and find a new way forward?
All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to tackle a massive puzzle about knowledge itself. It's a paradox, really, that gets you thinking. How can we be so sure about, well, anything, when our own personal experience of the world is just a tiny, tiny snapshot? I mean, really think about that for a second. We make these huge, grand, universal claims about how the world works, but our senses, what we can actually see, hear, and touch, they're incredibly limited. So how do our minds manage to bridge that enormous gap? How do we get from a tiny fragment of experience to this vast universal understanding? It kind of feels impossible, doesn't it?
So let's just lay it out, side by side. On one hand, you've got our senses, which are only ever catching a tiny piece of the universe. But on the other hand, you've got our knowledge, which makes these sweeping, universal statements. This right here is the heart of the paradox. So how in the world do we do it? How do we build this entire cathedral of understanding from just a handful of stones?
Well, the first part of the answer isn't out there in the world. Nope, it's inside our own minds. The solution begins with this kind of internal blueprint, a sort of universal map that, believe it or not, we're all born with.
You see, your mind isn't just a passive camera, just recording whatever happens to be in front of it. It's an active participant. It takes all that scattered, incomplete data from your senses, and it intuitively fills in the gaps, completing the picture based on a pre-existing model of how reality works.
Here's a brilliant way to picture this. Imagine your eye is like a CCTV camera. It only catches a quick glimpse of something. Let's say just the curve of a handlebar and a single spoke. That's the fragment. Instantly, your brain takes that limited info, cross-references it with its huge internal data bank of shapes and objects, finds a match, and concludes, ah, that's a bicycle, all before you've even seen the whole thing. And you know, in some philosophical traditions, this innate internal blueprint actually has a name, fitra. It's this idea of a universal pre-installed bit of software that lets us connect the dots and recognize truths that go way beyond what we've personally experienced. It's the very thing that gives our intuitions the power to build a complete picture from just partial data.
Okay, so our mind has this amazing tool for dealing with incomplete information. But what happens when our logic just seems to get completely jammed up? What do we do when we're faced with what looks like a total contradiction?
Right. Now this is the crucial point. A true contradiction, where two opposing things are true at the exact same moment, in the exact same way, that simply can't happen in reality. Full stop. What we think of as a contradiction is actually just a bottleneck, a jam, not in the world itself, but in our own thinking.
Just to be crystal clear about this, out there, in the real physical world, contradictions don't exist. They only pop up in our minds as a cognitive deadlock. It's just a temporary failure of our mental software to process a particular bit of information that seems to be at war with itself. Think of it like when your computer hangs. You know, the screen just freezes. The problem isn't reality, it's not the data you gave it. The problem is the program, the algorithm, is failing to process it. A contradiction is just the mind's version of a computer hanging. Okay, so if a contradiction is a mental glitch, how do we fix it? How do we unfreeze the system? Well, the answer is by learning to see things in terms of hierarchy.
by realizing that not all ideas exist on the same level.
Let's use the most famous example of a cognitive deadlock out there, the liar's paradox. This one simple sentence has been tying people's brains in knots for centuries because it seems to create this impossible, unbreakable logical loop.
And here's that loop. If the statement, "I am lying right now," is true, well, then it has to be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. It feels like a perfect logical trap, a piece of data our brains just can't process. But what if we're looking at it all wrong?
Here's the thing. The solution isn't to try and solve the loop. The solution is to realize the loop is just an illusion, one created by looking at it from a flat perspective. We need to add a new dimension, layers of thought.
So here's how we untangle it. We see the hierarchy. Think of the statement in two parts. Level 1 is the content, the act of lying right now. Level 2 is the label the speaker is putting on that content, I am. Now, the label isn't part of the content. It's a commentary about it. They're on different levels, so they're not in a head-on collision. And as soon as you see that hierarchy, the contradiction just vanishes.
So let's bring these two big ideas together, shall we? It turns out our minds are equipped with some incredibly powerful tools for getting past what seem on the surface like impossible limitations. So we have these two amazing mental tools we can use. To make sense of a fragmented world, our mind uses its internal map, its fitra, to fill in the blanks. And to solve these seemingly impossible logical deadlocks, it has this ability to shift its perspective, to see the problem from a higher, hierarchical level.
And that really is the key takeaway here. When you are stuck on a problem that feels impossible, doesn't matter if it's in logic, at work, or just in life, this solution might not be about finding more data out in the world. It might just be about changing the internal framework you're using to see it.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If some of the oldest paradoxes in logic are just illusions of perspective, what other problems that we think of as impossible today are just sitting there, waiting for us to find the right level, the right angle to look at them from? Thanks for joining us.
We've all heard about paradoxes, right? These perfect, unbreakable knots in the fabric of logic, statements that seem to completely contradict themselves. But what if that whole idea is just wrong? What if the contradictions we think we see aren't really contradictions at all? And here it is, the big one, the classic liar's paradox. It's one of the most famous philosophical puzzles in history, and you can see why. This tiny little sentence has tied some of the greatest thinkers in knots for centuries. I am lying right now. So, let's try and solve it. Is the person telling the truth, or are they lying? Well, if they're telling the truth, then the statement, I am lying, has to be true, which of course means they're lying. Okay, so what if they're lying? Well, if they're lying, then the statement, I am lying, is false, which must mean they're telling the truth. And round we go. You see the problem? It's a perfect endless loop. Now, this seems like the very definition of a contradiction. You've got two opposite ideas, truth and falsehood, and they're locked in a battle where neither one can ever win. But the source material for this explainer suggests something pretty radical, that there is no contradiction here, at all. We've just been looking at it the wrong way this entire time.
Okay, so to untangle this logical knot, we first need to get our heads around a really powerful mental tool. And to do that, we're actually going to step away from all this tricky language and jump into the physical world for a moment to solve a much simpler, more intuitive puzzle. Right now, as you're listening to this, you are perfectly still. You are also, at this very moment, hurtling through space at over 1,000 miles per hour. Now, both of those statements are completely 100% true. And on the surface, that sounds just as mad as the liar's paradox, doesn't it?
I mean, how can you be both still and moving at the same time? It feels impossible, like it just breaks the rules of logic. But of course it doesn't, and the solution to this little puzzle is the key that's going to unlock everything else for us.
The answer is hierarchy. The idea here is that things aren't always happening on the same playing field. Sometimes one state of being exists inside a larger one. They aren't actually fighting each other. They're just operating on completely different levels. Let's break that down, shall we? So on the inner level, relative to the room you're in, you are still. Simple enough. But that entire system, you, your chair, the room, it all exists within a much larger outer level, the Earth spinning on its axis. Your stillness is just one component of that larger motion. See? No contradiction at all, just two different levels of reality, one nested inside the other.
Right.
So with that idea of hierarchy now firmly in our heads, let's head back to our original problem. It's time to take this powerful new tool and apply it to that pesky statement, I am lying right now.
You see, the old way of looking at this problem puts truth and lie on the same level, which forces them into a fight. But the hierarchical view changes the game completely. It suggests this isn't about two opposing states at all, but about a statement and a higher-level description of that statement.
According to our source, there's only one thing actually happening here: the act of lying. The truthfulness of the statement isn't some separate competing force. No, it's just a meta-commentary. It's a label on a higher level that is accurately describing the lower-level action. This quote from the source material is the absolute heart of the idea. The honesty doesn't contradict the lie, it confirms it. The statement is being honest about the fact that it is a lie. One concept exists on a different plane, simply to describe the other.
So what does this all mean? It means the statement is true, and it's true because the person is lying. The two ideas aren't in conflict, they're in perfect harmony. The truth is the high-level label, and the lie is the event that's being labeled. And once you see that hierarchy, the paradox, well, it just melts away.
Now, this is more than just a clever trick for solving an old philosophical riddle. This hierarchical way of thinking actually has some pretty profound implications for how we understand the world and the so-called conflicts we see all around us.
So, what's the ultimate takeaway from all this? Well, it all boils down to this one simple idea: that so many things we see as contradictions aren't really two different events at war with each other. They are often just a single event, which is being viewed and labeled from two completely different hierarchical perspectives. The conflict isn't out there in reality, it's in our description of it.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question. Think about it. Think about a big debate, say where one side is arguing for economic growth and the other for environmental protection. Are those two things really in conflict? Or is it possible that a healthy environment is actually a necessary, lower-level foundation that you need for any kind of sustainable, long-term growth? How many of the world's conflicts are just a failure to see the right hierarchy? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.